If organizations, if schools are afraid of what they see and afraid of trying to solve an issue, I think then that's a problem. I think the idea is don't be afraid to look. Once you see it, you have to address it. You may get it wrong in addressing it, right? But as long as you have the will to constantly evolve and tweak your plan.
For this short documentary, I traveled back home to New York City and sat down with my former principal in East Harlem. In 2012, the state of this school was an absolute disaster. Fights were breaking out daily, weapons were being brought to school, guns, drugs. It literally felt like Shawshank Redemption had went to Harlem. If something didn't happen and happened quickly, the school was going to be shut down. In this documentary, we're going to explore two key concepts. Number one, how did Dyanand Sugrim and his teaching staff take this school from a 5% graduation rate to 95% in just 4 short years? After we get that story done, we will introduce problems that the education system is challenged with and share the solutions that my nonprofit, Work for Love, is working on to get those problems solved. So without further ado, here's Dyanand Sugrim talking about the state of the Heritage School in 2012.
When I walked in, Heritage graduation rate was 5%. And at that point, Heritage was designated as a CINI school, a school in need of improvement. So that was the thing that everyone saw when they saw Heritage. It was among the lowest 5% of all schools in the state of New York. And without any growth or progress, Heritage would have been closed. When I walked in here, not only was the graduation rate kind of hanging over my head, it was really a dangerous building. It was a building that had a lot of safety concerns. There were truancy issues. There were attendance issues, right? It was not a safe environment for learning. But one of the things that I noticed right away, and this was really about students talking with me as the principal, the senior class, members of the current senior class, I was their third principal in their 4 years at Heritage. And I think that stood out for me. So not only were we like looking at this graduation rate that was this doomsday scenario, it was a kind of a chaotic environment at the same time.
Just to highlight this part a little bit more, Principal Sugrim is missing out on a key couple graphic details, which I totally get. So as a former student who was seeing it from a completely different perspective, let me illustrate a story for you. One day after school, some buddies and I went to White Park, the after-school hangout spot. This is where kids were playing basketball, playing dice, laughing, joking, and we were all sitting down. All of a sudden, a group of bikes started to patrol the perimeter of the park. They entered through the park and came right up to a group of us sitting on the benches. The leader of the bike got off, pulled out a 6-inch blade, and said, "Where the Tyquil?" Tyquil was sitting right next to me. Tyquil immediately got up, squared his shoulders, and said, "Yo, what's up? What happened?" The leader of the pack said, "Yo, you're talking to my sister." Tyquil looked puzzled and kind of curious, and he said, Nah, bro, you got the wrong guy. I'm Tyquil. You're looking for Taekwon." So I tell this story just to share what the state of the environment felt like. Of course, it didn't always feel this way. Sugrim and his teaching staff and the families and the students transformed it pretty quickly. Now we're going to hear how Sugrim took everyone from feeling on a razor sharp edge to changing it toward an environment of safety and growth. Let's check it out.
My first approach was, and I'll go right into kind of how we tackled it, was what do we triage? What's our first approach? in helping raise this school from where we were. And immediately it was, let's look at graduation rate. Let's develop a plan to make sure that all kids had the support they needed, guidance support they needed, the programming support they needed. And there was a clear plan where we could evaluate every student's transcript, every student's plan or track to graduation. And I think that was probably the initial point of kind of tackling how we need to change the trajectory of the school. The first graduation rate after year one was not great, but it was not 5%. I think we hovered around 45 to 50%. So this CINI program, the State of School in Need of Improvement designation, was a 2-year. But if we didn't make progress, there would be obviously some changes to the school. So while that was happening, there was also a need to develop the social and emotional experience of what kids were doing here. We had to build community. Students had to feel that they belonged in this school. And when I walked in, because of the constant leadership turnover that kids were experiencing, maybe perhaps even teacher turnover before I came, but that was the idea. Everything was transient, and kids did not feel like they belong in this school, or there was nothing here for them to own, right? And that's something we kind of changed right away. When we looked at how we can best support the students, it was me standing outside, morning entry, greeting every student, me outside a dismissal every single day, make sure everyone's safe. And when I didn't see a student, I would make sure, hey, I didn't see you yesterday, what's going on? Let's call mom, let's make sure everything's okay. And I started to develop relationships with every student. At one point, I knew the name of every one of my students. I knew a story about every one of my students. And I can have a brief 3-second conversation. And I think that was all that students needed. They knew that someone took the time, the interest, and cared about their story. And I think once I had that going, the next steps were easy. Changing instruction was easy. Improving attendance was easy, because the kids responded in such a positive way to the approach.
So I interviewed Daniel Milbrand, and he's the assistant principal at New Visions Advanced in New York City, a wonderful, charismatic leader. And in this podcast, we talked about his story. Here he is chiming in.
That's something I've brought to my current school. And if you were to walk into the school I'm at now, it's like the moment you walk in, you want to feel, and this is for adults, kids, staff, everyone, you want to feel welcomed, you want to feel excited to be there, and you want to feel like there's someone in the building there to support you. And I think SEL, social emotional learning, is like the hallmark of our school and the thing that we do the best about developing relationships with kids, making sure everyone feels welcomed. And I think that's key to being a successful school. So, it's kind of like this idea of like starting from the top with a great leader, but also from the ground up, listening to what the kids want and meeting their needs.
There it is. You all now know the secrets that 2 principals in New York City have used to completely transform their school. I'm kidding, of course. There's so much more, and we're going to release another video soon. This next question I asked Dyanand Sugrim was key. This question had 2 parts. The first one, is there a greater need to continue this work? The next part to that question I asked, can this model be scaled? And if so, what does it look like?
Let me just give you another example. A couple of years ago, and this is about going back to identifying the need and addressing the need of your school, right? Your question about can this be scaled? It must be scaled. It must be done, right? We lost a student in Heritage, Luis Encarnacion. We lost him to gun violence, right? Because of my counseling and schools partnership, we were able to reach out to the New York Academy of Medicine, Columbia University, and UNICEF. And we developed a program where we wanted to know what the students at Heritage and the East Harlem community felt or knew, or what experiences they had around gun violence. So that partnership was out of a real need. And as we sit here today, We now have 2 published papers, right, through NIAM and Columbia University. And in essence, it looked at, there are lots of people in professional organizations who are developing procedures and laws, right, and policy around gun violence. And then we have the kids at Heritage and the East Harlem community who are experiencing violence and gun violence on almost a daily basis. But these policymakers never include the voice of the kids who are feeling that. And that was the premise of our partnership with NIAM, Columbia University, and UNICEF. So the students at Heritage, we now have a voice. The students at Heritage have said, this is what gun violence looks like to us on a daily basis. And we're using that to make sure that we share that information with organizations that are developing policy. Because if you're developing policy without the voice of the children, it's probably not going to be very effective. So that's the goal. And it's a wonderful partnership, and it's worked very well. This is now, I think, year 4 of that partnership, and we're still continuing that work. The next step for us is the UN. We want to share these findings with organizations and countries to develop, the student voice in policy.
What a powerful story so far, right? There's so much more that Principal Sugrim talks about, and we'll get to that later. But for now, I want to switch gears and talk about another story that has great impact and weight. On my 16th birthday, my father told me, go get a job. I didn't know what the lesson was at the time, but earning enough money to take my girlfriend out and buy good food sounded like a good deal to me. And so I did. And with a matter of a week, I had my peers approaching me left and right saying, yo, can you put me on? Can you show me the ropes? And this is where the idea of Work for Love was started. We had no idea the impact we all were going to have. We just wanted to help our friends learn how to earn. Really simple. I asked him to review our model and asked him very simple questions. A, is there still a need for this work to be done? And if so, how do we achieve it? And then B, can this model be scalable? Right? Can we take the same ideas that Principal Sugrim had with the transformation and apply it to helping students get jobs? That's what I wanted to learn. And wow, was I shocked at the work he was already doing.
How can we support students? If we want students to be successful after high school, what are some of the things that they needed other than the academic aspect to be successful? And we thought, what about those social skills that no one ever talks about? And that was the focus of the advisory committee. When we look at Heritage and what stands out about our school, I would say it's that double-stranded college readiness program and that advisory program. Because our philosophy is, not only do kids need a strong academic background to be successful in college, but they also need that social aspect. And that social aspect is often underlooked, right? Overlooked, right? And underexamined. So what happens is we take things for granted on the social aspect, right? There's students who easily find a niche in a community outside of high school, outside of college, while other students struggle. And we found that Heritage students didn't have those skills necessarily, or we didn't develop those skills. So the advisory program was intentional, really intentional, about coupling the academic with the social aspect of being a well-rounded student that would be successful after high school. And that didn't necessarily mean college, but it was successful after high school. So just circling back to the idea of data and using data, it has to be authentic and real, right? And what better way to get it than from your kids in your school? Right, and then you can't shy away from developing program to help students address those concerns.
Sam Williams, a former student of East Harlem, talking a bit more about the foundation of Work for Love. Let's check it out.
I was a busboy at Belgium when I was 17 years old. I was going into my senior year. I mean, I was already in my senior year, actually. I had just finished the football season, and I was looking for something to do. It was either join the wrestling team or find a job. And if a job came first, then I was going to just do the job because I wanted to make the money. And I actually remember going with a good friend of mine. He told me to, he said, wear some slacks, wear some nice, black shoes, nice button up, make yourself look presentable, print out about 10 resumes and just walk down Amsterdam Avenue. And for those of you that don't know, Amsterdam Avenue is an avenue in New York City that has tons of restaurants going down on the Upper West Side. So we did that, and I walked with this guy, and I was just going into different places, handing him my resume, and I handed it into Bodrum. And then he was like, hey man, we was on the bus going to I was talking to him, I was going to the east side. He was like, yeah, you should give him a call, let him know that you're interested, and just, double back, tell him thank you for just even meeting me. I was like, all right, I'll do that. So I gave him a call, and they hired me.
So Sam went to college and earned his degree, as did I, at a pretty good business school, I might add. What we're driven by, much like Principal Sugrim, is the clear need for our work. So to close it out, I asked him, A, what would next steps look like? If we know there's a clear need for our work, and we know we have a model, and we know it's scalable, where do we go now? How do we help more people?
When we look at what students are doing after high school, are they successful? Now, in terms of, as a principal, some would argue that my job or my role and my responsibility ends once graduation from high school, right? Begins. And I'm not responsible for what happens. We don't share that philosophy here. And I think that if we, as a nation, right, in a larger structure, we look at what kids are doing at each level of their education and their experiential learning, right? And job placement and job training. I think we need to carefully examine at each step and developing a strategy for continuous improvement. I think that's the way it should be. What I would say, my advice to the higher ups, look at what's happening at the grassroots organizations. Look at what works. Look at what works in a school. Look at what works in maybe, a nonprofit organization. Maybe they found a formula. Maybe they found something that works for their students or their population. That's something that can be scaled. And I think that's what we should be looking at in a larger context. I think if you can look at what happened at Heritage and the change and the transformation over the past 13 years, I would say it's probably in maybe three big bucket items. The first would be having a real understanding. And, without throwing out the term data too often, just having a real understanding of the need of your community. In whatever form that looks like, you find it and you investigate that need, right? The second piece would be find the right partners that would help you develop programming around those needs. And if I can encompass just finding the need and the partners to develop programming to support that need, I would say that in itself is continuous improvement. I think every school, every principal should have the drive for continuous improvement and a plan for continuous improvement. Develop small-scale programming and do test runs and see what information that gives you and how you can modify before it becomes a permanent part of your structure and your strand. But I think just the idea of examining, sometimes programming may fall flat. It may not work. But the idea of constantly wanting to evolve, wanting to be better, constantly wanting to solve a problem, I think that is a must.